I moved to a quiet suburb a few weeks ago. I thought a change of scenery would help me clear my mind after losing my job. The neighborhood looked normal. Boxy houses from the 90s lined the streets, with neat gardens everywhere. I rented a small house that had belonged to an elderly couple. It felt warm and nostalgic at first. I never imagined I'd feel uneasy about it. On my second night, I woke up to muffled sounds. It was like distant conversations coming from the walls. I couldn't make out the words. Maybe it was my imagination. I brushed it off, focusing on my sketches. But the whispers stayed in the back of my mind. As days passed, the voices came back. They were persistent, like a low hum. I noticed Mrs. Harris, my elderly neighbor, spending strange hours in her garden. I often caught her looking at my house with a blank expression. It felt unsettling, but I told myself she was just an old lady with nothing to do. I never saw any children playing outside, even though the sounds seemed to come from my walls at odd times, a giggle here, a shout there. I couldn't figure it out, and it gnawed at me. One evening, I stepped outside for fresh air. I looked over at Mrs. Harris. She was hunched over in her garden, but when I made eye contact, she straightened up and stared at me. I felt my heart race. I waved, but she didn't respond. I sighed and went back inside. Later that night, I heard it again, the muffled voices, clearer this time. The walls felt like they were vibrating. Then it stopped. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I paced the room, trying to reason with my thoughts. Maybe it was just the wind, or the house settling, or something else. I thought about talking to Mrs. Harris. She might explain the sounds. But the next day when I opened my door, she was at it again, staring at my window, like she was waiting for something. A chill washed over me. What was she waiting for? Then, the children's laughter filled the air again. It echoed through the walls. I glanced over at Mrs. Harris. She was still watching, and I couldn't tell if she was smiling or if it was just the light playing tricks. I didn't know what to do. This wasn't an ordinary neighborhood, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stay. I felt like I was being watched. I avoided people, spending more time indoors with my sketches. Then it happened. I stood by the window one evening, and Mrs. Harris was in her garden again. I heard her whisper something as I passed. "You'll find them soon." Who was she talking about? The children? Or something else? The mystery weighed on me. I couldn't ignore it. I could feel the weight of the whispers in the walls. I felt like they were breathing, waiting for something to happen. As of now, I still don't know where it leads, but I can't shake that sense of dread. It creeps back every night. And Mrs. Harris? She asked, still watching. The following day felt heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something I didn't understand. I decided to confront Mrs. Harris. I needed answers, even if I didn't know how to ask. When I stepped outside, the air felt thick, and I could almost believe the whispers in the walls were alive. I walked to her yard, trying to muster up the courage. Mrs. Harris was there again, tending to her garden as if it were an altar. I cleared my throat. "Mrs. Harris?" I called, but she didn't react. She continued to prune the flowers, her fingers working carefully with the stems. I hesitated, uncertain if I should approach any closer. "Can we talk?" I added, louder this time. Finally, she looked up, her face blank but her eyes sharp as glass. "Talk?" she repeated, tilting her head as if my words confused her. "About what?" "About the sounds," I stumbled. "That I hear at night, the laughter. I thought maybe you could help me understand." She stood up slowly, her expression unreadable. "Sounds? Children's laughter?" She paused, and a ghost of a smile flickered across her lips. "You'll hear much more than that soon." Then she turned back to her flowers, humming softly. It sent shivers down my spine. I could feel her words land like stones in my gut. What did she mean by that? I turned away, my heart racing. I went back inside and closed the door, leaning against it. That night, as I lay in bed, the whispers rose again. This time, it felt urgent. I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to decipher the blend of voices. I heard a child scream, a joyous sound mixed with fear. It sent a chill through me. Was it possible that something was wrong? I flipped on my lamp, but the light did little to banish my unease. I reached for my notebook, planning to sketch as a distraction, but the voices lingered like a weight. Instead, I paced my small living room, searching for a clue. The laughter grew louder, almost mocking. I couldn't focus. Finally, the whispers turned into a cacophony. I grabbed my phone and pointed it toward the wall, hoping to record it. As I pressed play, the voices echoed back, twisted and garbled, but one word stood out, clear as day: help. I jolted back. My breath quickened. What did that mean? The whispers had turned into pleas. I had to act. Maybe Mrs. Harris knew more than she had let on. I decided to confront her again, but as I moved toward the door, a low scraping sound came from the window. I froze, heart pounding. Slowly, I turned around. There was a shadow outside, just past the curtain. My breath hitched. That's when I saw it, a face peering in at me, pale and small, wide eyes staring with an intensity that sent a shock of fear through me. I stumbled back, trying to catch my breath. Who was there? Everything felt too surreal. I wanted to scream, but the very idea of making noise seemed dangerous. The figure shifted, and I closed my eyes, not wanting to see any more. I stood frozen, waiting for the next moment to unfold. I forced my eyes open, but the figure was gone. Just like that, it disappeared, the face, the shadow, the unsettling feeling. My heart raced, thrumming in my chest. I felt like I was being tested. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I stayed rooted in place. I couldn't let fear win. Taking a deep breath, I tiptoed to the window, cautiously pulling back the curtain. The night was dark and quiet, but the air felt charged, as if something lingered just out of sight. I dared to look outside again, but all I saw was the stillness of the yard, shadows playing tricks on my tired eyes. I needed answers. I had to figure out what was happening. The next morning, I decided to visit Mrs. Harris again. I had my questions lined up, and this time, I would get answers. As I walked to her house, I noticed how the sunlight felt strangely absent, as if even the day wanted to keep secrets. When I arrived, Mrs. Harris was gone. Her garden looked untouched, with nothing moving but the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. I felt frustrated and anxious. I couldn't leave without talking to her. I wandered around the side of her house, hoping to catch a glimpse, to see if she had just stepped inside or was perhaps in her shed. That's when I saw a wooden door partially ajar at the back of her house. It was small, hidden. My curiosity pulled me closer. I glanced around to ensure no one was watching and nudged the door open a bit more. The scent of earth and decaying leaves wafted out, mixed with something metallic. My heart raced, but I couldn't back down now. I stepped inside. The dim room was cluttered with tools and old garden supplies. In the far corner, there was a small desk piled high with papers. I took a tentative step forward, noticing an old box tucked beneath the desk. My hands trembled as I reached for it, my curiosity battling with fear. Inside the box were photographs, faded images of children, playing in front of what looked like a long-gone playground. I flipped through the stack, and my stomach twisted at the sight of their smiles. But then I found something more chilling, a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle. The headline read, "Local children go missing during summer festival." I dropped the box, the impact sending a hollow echo through the room. As I backed away, recalling the laughter I heard. It was uneasy now, filled with a sense of loss. What had happened to those kids? Had Mrs. Harris known them? Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, and I froze. It was a soft creak, as if someone was stepping closer. Panic surged through me, and I swung around, ready to confront whatever was about to happen. But the room was empty. My breath hitched in my throat as I scanned the small, cluttered room. The silence felt like a weight pressing down, heavy and suffocating. I stood completely still, straining to hear anything, any sign that I wasn't alone. But nothing came. Just the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I backed up slowly, not wanting to turn my back on the door. Each step felt agonizing as I fought my instincts to bolt out of there. That box, those photographs, they spoke volumes, but I needed to know more. What had happened to the children? And why did Mrs. Harris have all of this? Gathering my courage, I turned to the desk again. I spotted a few papers peeking out from under a stack. I reached for them, almost afraid of what I might find. They were handwritten notes, scrawled messily. One phrase caught my attention. "They come when the sun sets." My skin prickled. What did that mean? I could feel my pulse quicken. I shoved the notes into my pocket, determined to examine them later. I had to get out of here. As I backed out of the small wooden door, I nearly stumbled. Outside, the day had shifted. The sky was overcast now, the sun hidden behind ominous clouds. A chill ran up my spine. It felt like the world was closing in around me. I stepped into Mrs. Harris's garden, my senses on high alert. The flowers that had earlier danced idly in the breeze now seemed muted, their colors dimmed by the gloomy sky. I glanced around, half expecting to find Mrs. Harris lurking in the shadows. But the yard was deserted. I decided to head home, my mind racing with questions. What was Mrs. Harris hiding? The missing children, the laughter that echoed in my memory, the strange notes, everything felt interconnected. I shuffled down the pathway, thoughts swirling as anxiety gripped me. Then I heard it again, a faint giggle, tinkles of laughter carried on the wind. My heart dropped. I paused, looking around wildly. It came from further down the street, from the direction of the old playground. I hadn't seen kids there in ages. Taking a deep breath, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I had to investigate, had to find out if those sounds tied back to the missing children and the secrets buried in Mrs. Harris's shed. I quickened my pace, moving toward the source of the laughter. As I approached the playground, the atmosphere shifted again. The old swings creaked, as if moving on their own, despite the absence of children. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. Each step felt like a bold choice into the unknown. Just as I reached the entrance to the playground, the laughter faded. I stood there, frozen, peering into the shadows beneath the trees. And then I saw a figure, a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, and everything went still. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. I jerked back, bumping against the rusty metal gate. My heart pounded like a drum, my breath hitching again. The figure was a child, no older than 7 or 8, with wide, innocent eyes that seemed too big for their thin face. A rush of relief washed over me, but it was quickly clouded by the uneasy feeling that settled in my chest. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, trying not to sound too panicked. The child didn't respond but stood there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. I noticed they wore a tattered shirt that looked too large for their small frame. It hung down to their knees. "Where are your parents?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The playground felt different now, as though it had transformed into a thick fog that enveloped us both. They didn't answer. Instead, they turned and began to wander deeper into the shadows of the swings. I hesitated. Should I follow? There was something unsettling about the way the child moved, as if they were drawn by an invisible force. And then, without thinking, I stepped forward, my curiosity pulling me along against my better judgment. "Wait!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. But the child didn't look back. I pushed through the creaking gate and followed, my instincts screaming that this wasn't right. The laughter had returned, echoing again from somewhere deeper in the playground. It was higher now, almost dreamy, like a melody drifting from a far-off place. I glanced around, scanning the area where shadows hid behind the trees. "Is anyone else here?" I asked, my voice barely breaking the thick silence. My throat tightened as I advanced, each step feeling like it was taking me further away from safety. As I rounded the corner, I saw the child standing in front of a dilapidated slide. It was a familiar sight. I had played here when I was younger. But now it seemed twisted, almost surreal. Suddenly, I noticed something peeking out from beneath the slide, a toy, a bright red ball. But it wasn't just a ball, it looked dirty and worn, as if it had been lost long ago and forgotten. I bent down to pick it up when I heard soft whispers, faint but unmistakable. There was more than just the child here, hidden in the darkness. My pulse quickened again, and I felt a familiar sense of dread wash over me as I glanced back at the child. "Who's here?" I whispered, forcing the question out. The child finally spoke, their voice soft but urgent. "You shouldn't be here. They don't like it when people come after the sun sets." A chill crawled up my spine. The notes in my pocket echoed in my mind, like an unwelcomed reminder. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, the child turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows of the playground. "Wait!" I shouted, but it was too late. I was alone again. My heart raced as I scanned the shadows, feeling exposed and vulnerable. I could still hear the whispers, growing louder. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. I stumbled back, ready to retreat when I caught sight of movement again. That's when I saw a group of children standing together in the distance, their faces partially hidden beneath the branches. They all seemed to be staring at me, their expressions eerily blank, and I knew at that moment that I had ventured too close to whatever secrets lingered in the playground. And then, everything went dark. I gasped as the darkness engulfed me, a thick veil that snuffed out even the dim light of the playground. I felt my pulse race, the silence pressing down on me. I reached for my phone, but it felt heavy and useless in my trembling hands. I knew I needed to move, to get out of this eerie place. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. It echoed back at me, a lonely sound swallowed up by the silence. I took hesitant steps toward where I thought the gate was, focusing on the distant sliver of light. Just as I turned to leave, I heard the laughter again. It wasn't just from one child. It was a chorus, overlapping and twinkling like shattered glass. My instincts screamed at me not to look back, but I couldn't resist. I turned slowly, my gaze creeping toward the branch where the children had been standing. They were still there, but now they moved, sinking deeper into the shadows where the light couldn't touch them. Their bodies twisted and contorted, as though they were part of the darkness itself, and my breath hitched. "Who are you?" I whispered, feeling ridiculous for talking to phantoms. No response came, but that didn't stop their laughter from seeping into my bones. Fear gripped me tighter. I knew I needed to get out. I took another step backward, my heels catching on the uneven ground. That's when I spotted the red ball again, lying just a few feet away. It seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, beckoning me to approach. Against my better judgment, I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cold, grimy surface. A sudden chill swept through the air, and I froze. The laughter crescendoed all around me, drowning out my scattered thoughts. "Don't touch it!" A voice sliced through the laughter, startling me. I whipped around. From the darkness emerged a slightly larger figure, a boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with an expression that looked both scared and angry. "Don't you know? They all know you're here," he yelled, his eyes wide and frantic. My heart sank further. "Who? What do you mean?" I began to ask, but before he could answer, the shadows seemed to swirl, closing in on us. I could no longer see the children I had glimpsed earlier. "Run!" he shouted, yanking at my arm. Instinct took over, and I darted after him, managing to keep pace despite the twisting shadows. We stumbled through the playground toward the gate. With every step, I could feel invisible eyes watching. An overwhelming sense of urgency propelled us forward, but the laughter continued to echo, taunting from the shadows. Then, just as we reached the gate, I heard a hiss, a sound so sharp it stopped me in my tracks. "Not so fast." It was a chilling voice that felt like ice running down my spine. "Keep going," the boy yelled, kicking the gate open. I didn't know if obeying him was wise, but I bolted through, feeling the pull of whatever lingered behind. As I stumbled out, I turned back just in time to see the children reappear, standing together, their eyes now glowing faintly in the darkness, and I was left with more questions than answers. "Who were they?" I whispered as we ran from the playground, But I knew the truth. Whatever secret lay buried beneath those laughter-filled shadows was only beginning to unfurl. We ran for what felt like forever, my legs burning as I tried to keep up with the boy. He slowed down until we reached a deserted street, far from the playground. Panting, I put my hands on my knees, desperate for air. It took a moment before I could speak. Who are you?" I gasped, looking at him. His dark hair was messy, and his eyes flickered with a wild panic. "I'm Eric," he said breathlessly, glancing over his shoulder as if the shadows had followed us. "And you shouldn't be there. They get mad when someone sees them." "Sees who?" I asked, afraid of his answer. He took a deep breath and pointed down the street. "The children. They're not like us. They want to play, but it's a game you don't want to join." I shuddered at the thought of the laughter, the twisted forms I had glimpsed lurking in the darkness. "What do you mean, not like us?" Eric hesitated, eyes filled with a mix of fear and sadness. "They only come out at night. They say they're lost, but I think they just want company." "Why do they want company?" I asked, feeling a chill creep up my spine. He shook his head, twisting his hands nervously. "I don't know. I don't want to know. They want to play, but the last person who played with them." His voice trailed off. "What happened?" I urged. My heart raced as dread washed over me. Before he could respond, a rustle came from behind us, and I turned to see a shadow darting between two parked cars. My breath caught in my throat. "Eric, did you see that?" I pointed, but he gripped my arm tightly. "Don't look," he hissed. "They're here." The air thickened, and I felt an eerie chill. Eric began to back away slowly, pulling me with him. I felt frozen, unsure whether to run or stay. But the sense of danger made the decision for me. "Run!" I cried, and we took off again, sprinting down the street. My heart pounded in rhythm with my footsteps, fear driving me forward. We rounded a corner, and hid behind a tall fence, trying to catch our breath. "What now?" I asked, glancing anxiously around us. "I think we lost them for now," Eric whispered, but his eyes were wide, scanning the area. "But we have to figure out how to stop them. If they find us again." Before he could finish, I caught something glimmering in the nearby park, a flash of red. The same red ball I had seen earlier. My stomach dropped. "That's it," I said, pointing. "The ball." It was glowing, and they were laughing. "Don't touch it," Eric shouted again, panic lacing his voice. Something clicked in my mind. What if it is a trap? "It's a gateway," he said, his eyes darting around, his voice barely above a whisper. "If they get your attention, they can pull you in." Just then, a sudden silence enveloped us. A sense of dread washed over me, cold and heavy. "That's how they play," Eric muttered, and I could see the glimmer of those children's eyes reflecting in the darkness around us. "Then we have to leave now," I said, but just as we turned to run, the laughter bubbled up again, louder than before, echoing through the park. I felt it a pull, as if something was drawing me back to the shadowy figures. I turned to Eric, but he was already looking haunted, something in his expression warning me we were far from safe. And then I heard one of them call out, "We just want to play." Panic surged. I grabbed Eric's hand and we took off again, but deep down I knew this wasn't over, and that something much darker was just beginning to set its sights on us. We darted down the street, my lungs burning, heart racing. Every shadow felt alive, stretching out like fingers reaching for us. Behind me, Eric was gasping for breath, and his grip tightened around my hand. "Where do we go?" I shouted, fear tinging my voice. "Anywhere but here," he yelled back, panic evident in his eyes. We veered left down an alleyway, ducking under low-hanging branches and heaps of discarded debris. As we turned another corner, I glanced over my shoulder. The laughter had faded, but the eerie silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. Eric pulled me into a narrow passage between two tall buildings. I could barely see the sky above us. The walls felt like they were closing in. "Do you think they're gone?" I whispered, trying to steady my breath. "I don't know," He sounded just as scared as I felt. We have to find somewhere safe. Before I could respond, I froze, my eyes catching a flicker of movement. A small figure stood at the end of the alley, illuminated by a flickering street lamp. The faint glow reflected off their pale skin, making them look almost ghostly. "What is it?" Eric asked, eyes wide. "I think I see one of them," I stammered, pointing. The child was dressed in ragged clothes, hair disheveled, a haunting smile stretched across their face. They tilted their head, curiosity sparkling in their dark eyes. "Don't look at them," Eric whispered urgently, but my body wouldn't obey. "It's just a child." But the child's grin widened, and that laughter echoed back in my ears. I stepped backward involuntarily, and Eric's grip tightened. "Come play with me," the child called, voice sweet yet chilling. My skin crawled as a sense of dread filled the narrow space between us. That smile felt wrong, twisted, and unnatural. I shook my head, trying to break the spell. "We can't," I said, forcing my voice steady. "We need to leave." Within moments, the child's demeanor changed. The playful expression turned sharp, eyes narrowing into slits. "But you've already seen us," they said, stepping closer. "Run!" Eric shouted, pulling me back as the child lunged. I stumbled, nearly falling, but we took off again, sprinting down the alleyway, pushing through the lingering shadows. As we emerged onto a street, the night air hit me hard. Something wasn't right. The shadows felt thicker and denser here. It felt like we had entered another world. The buildings loomed ominously, their windows dark and far too quiet. "Where are we?" I panted, trying to catch my breath. "I don't know," Eric replied confusedly, peering around. "We've gone too far." Just then, I froze again, something in the distance catching my attention. A flicker of red shone through the darkness. The ball. It was back, sitting innocently at the edge of the street, glowing brightly as if it were calling to me. "No," I murmured, my heart racing. "We can't go near it," Eric warned, but it was too late. I felt the pull again, stronger this time, as laughter wrapped around me like a blanket. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the shadows shifted around us, converging at the edges of the street. Low whispers filled the air, pulling my gaze toward the ball. "Listen," Eric said, horror creeping over his face. "They're coming." A sudden urgency took hold of me, pressing down on my chest. "We can't get trapped," I said, the reality crashing in. "We need to run back the way we came." But the laughter grew louder, ringing in my ears. It was chaotic, a twisted melody inviting us to play. Just as I opened my mouth to scream, the shadows surged forward, and everything went dark. And then, nothing. I gasped as light flooded back into my vision. I blinked, disoriented, and sat up. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and my heart still raced from the adrenaline. I was sprawled on the cold ground, dirt caking my hands and knees. Eric was next to me, groaning softly. "Eric!" I exclaimed, shaking him. "Are you okay?" He blinked his eyes open and sat up slowly. "Where are we?" His voice was hoarse. I surveyed our surroundings. We were in a dimly lit room, barely large enough to fit us both. The walls were made of damp concrete, and only a thin strip of light at the far end hinted at an exit. An overwhelming mustiness filled the air, and I could hear the distant sound of water dripping somewhere. Did we pass out?" I asked, rubbing my temples. "No. They must have brought us here." He stood and moved towards the doorway, caution in his steps. I rose, feeling unsteady but following closely behind. "Who brought us?" I whispered, panic rising just as it had in the alleyway. The memory of the child's twisted smile sent chills down my spine. Was it that? "I don't know." Eric frowned, peering into the darkness that stretched beyond the dim light. "We need to get out of here." With hesitant steps, we made our way toward the light. As we approached, I noticed symbols carved into the walls, swirling shapes that seemed to shift when I looked closely. My throat tightened. They felt wrong, as if they were watching us. When we reached the door, Eric pushed against it. It creaked open, revealing a narrow corridor. We stepped out into a hallway, our steps echoing eerily. The air was cooler here, and the whispers from before returned, faint and almost melodic. It felt like every voice was calling out, urging us to turn back. "Do you hear that?" I asked, clutching Eric's arm. He nodded, dread pooling in his eyes. "We need to keep moving. It's a trap." We hurried forward, navigating through the dim corridor. The more we walked, the thicker the shadows seemed to grow around us. I felt a sense of urgency building. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't let the fear control me. Then everything changed again. Just ahead, a door swung open with a creak. I hesitated, seeing a flicker of movement. I turned to Eric, who was staring ahead, frozen. "Eric?" I whispered. "What's wrong?" That S when I saw it something glimmering on the ground inside the room. A toy doll with glassy eyes and hair that looked unreal, like a tangled mess of yarn. My breath hitched. It reminded me of childhood but felt corrupted wrong. Suddenly, the whispers escalated into a cacophony, pulling me toward the door. "Don't touch it!" Eric shouted, grabbing my arm. "It's a trap!" But I was already drawn to it, my body moving against my will. The laughter erupted once more, echoing in my mind. As my fingers reached for the doll, the walls began to shudder, and the corridor twisted as shadows clawed their way closer. I could feel the heat of something very wrong heating up behind me. "Run!" Eric yelled, yanking me back as the shadows surged forward, and everything once again sank into darkness. I woke up again, this time on the cool damp ground of a familiar place, the playground. The rusty swings creaked in the wind, and the evening sky bled orange as the sun sank behind clouds. I shot up, memories of laughter and fear flooding my mind. Panic set in when I realized I was alone, no sign of Eric or the lurking shadows. "Eric!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the empty playground structures. The silence around me was suffocating, and it felt as if the laughter was still lingering, waiting just out of sight. My heart raced as I scrambled to my feet and searched the area, but there was nothing, just faded glory, the playground in disrepair. I tried remembering the path back, clutching my head as fragments of the last few hours collided. Something compelled me to walk toward the old slide, as if I were being summoned. The whispers had faded, replaced by a stillness that gnawed at my nerves. Still trembling, I approached, praying for a sign of what had happened. "Come play with us," I heard faintly, a chorus that sent chills down my spine. Swallowing my fear, I gathered my courage. "Where are you?" I called out, the loneliness around me pressing in, and that urge to run surged again. As I stepped into shadows cast by the dying light of the day, I felt the air change, thickening around me. I turned back to see the park transforming, shadows growing, stretching, as though the ground beneath me twisted into something sinister. The laughter erupted again, chaotic and echoing like a cruel lullaby. "Get out!" a voice yelled, startling me. Eric suddenly appeared, out of breath and pale, eyes darting with fear. "We have to." Before he finished, a metallic sound cut through the chaos, and from the depths of the playground, a figure emerged, a child, hair wild and dark, eyes glowing like coal. "You shouldn't have come here, you've seen too much!" they shouted, laughter dripping from their voice. "Eric, run!" I screamed, grabbing his hand, and we dashed toward the exit. I could feel the shadows close in, almost tangible, an echo of those children, their joy laced with something darker. "Where's the way out?" Eric shouted, desperately scanning the edges of the playground. I pointed toward the fence, but instead of leading us to safety, it seemed to morph into an impenetrable wall of darkness. "We can't let them catch us." I pulled him with all my strength as we tore through, dodging between beams of light and shadows, desperately seeking any trace of safety. Just as we approached the gate, more figures materialized, children, faces twisted into haunting smiles, their laughter reverberating through the air. "Stay with us," they beckoned, each word laced with a blend of innocence and malice. "No!" I shouted, instinct overtaking my body. In a burst of adrenaline, we charged forward, pushing through the gate just as we felt fingers brush against our backs. We stumbled onto the street, gasping for breath as we made it through. Darkness draped over the playground like a shroud, muffling the echoes of laughter. I glanced back just in time to see the figures watching us from the shadows, eyes glinting with the promise of secrets untold. Did we make it? Eric gasped, looking around as if expecting something to leap out from the darkness. I think so, I managed, but a sense of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The laughter still echoed faintly in my mind, lulling me into uncertainty. But I don't think they're gone. Days passed, blending into nights. I moved back into my house, but the atmosphere was thick with an uncanny silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Harris and those children were still lurking, waiting for something, or someone. I often glanced out my window toward the playground, the stillness there feeling wrong, unearthed memories gnawing at my thoughts. I never saw Mrs. Harris again. The children, the laughter haunted my mind when it got quiet, and I often found myself pacing as night descended, the air thick with a forgotten melody. I never returned to that old neighborhood. I changed my phone number, avoided calls from random numbers, and even moved further away. But every now and then, I catch myself straining to listen, searching for the echoes of laughter that lingers. The line between joy and terror faded, leaving me with uncertainties I couldn't untangle. Sometimes I wonder if what I experienced was more than just a trick of the mind or the shadow of grief. Those children remain a mystery, woven into the fabric of my everyday, forever asking for company. It changed how I see things, but what I learned still feels like a secret shattered into pieces, difficult to grasp. With a hesitant heart, I resolved to keep moving forward, but in the back of my mind, the laughter remains a reminder that unease can lurk in the light, too.